So I'm going to just start with talking about, you know, it lists Joe as also working with me, and Joe has offered to answer questions if needed via email, and I can paste his email in the chat. And he has worked a lot more with the label designer. I've only, you know, done the things I needed to do, and he's needed a lot more than that. So he is willing to answer questions that way. And just wanted to let you know that I recently worked with Joel to get BarTender connected to Epicor. So he knew, you know, the label part and some of the other functions, but how to get the data out of Epicor and how to, you know, print the labels, etc., is what I worked with him about. And he's working from home and does not have all the tools available, so he won't be demonstrating, but he, like I said, he did offer to answer email questions too if you have any for him. Otherwise, you can also email or ask questions in the chat from us. So let me get the chat here.
No worries, I'll post it in chat for you.
There. Well, they can probably all see it on my screen anyway. All right, so now I'll get started with my presentation. So today we're going to be talking about BarTender and barcodes, different options for barcodes. We'll discuss and compare the three main options for working with barcodes in the Epicor software. Each of these options can also be used with other software products, but we will focus on using them with Epicor. Barcoding options can be used with Epicor 8 and higher. There are different versions of the barcoding software available, and you may be more familiar with other versions and not the version shown here today, but many of the comparisons will be similar. Understand that there's a lot to know about each of these options, and I'm aware that I don't have full knowledge about every function within each software, but I will answer any questions possible, and feel free to ask any questions during the presentations, and I will answer them if I can. Otherwise, we will get back to you with an answer via email if further research is needed. So what benefits do you achieve by using barcodes? Well, usually you can get some faster data entry, more accurate data entry. You can use barcodes for identification into some security systems, for example, maybe in door locks. It allows your system to use barcodes in a more timely and give you more timely information. And you might also use barcodes to meet requirements from customers or vendors. They might request a certain label that you create and use barcodes on. And you can store more information into a small area, for example, using QR codes or other 2D codes. So these are the most common benefits for using barcodes. Scanning barcodes into Epicor forms is faster and more accurate than typing the same information. A barcode on an ID badge possibly can be read with an infrared reader on a door lock, or can be scanned to log into MES, which is Epicor's manufacturing execution system. Some customers or vendors may want specific labels for shipping out product or for getting products into their system for your purchase orders. Does anyone have other advantages for barcoding that you would like to share with the group? If so, feel free to put some in the chat. So let's see, I see. Okay, Joe's email is in the chat. But if anybody else has any other questions or examples for barcodes, please share them with the group. And in the meantime, we'll continue on. So as mentioned, we're going to discuss three options. The three options we're going to discuss are DataWorks 3 of 9, ID automation software, and BarTender software. And we'll go through kind of an overview of the pros and cons and costs in the next couple of slides, and then slides with individual information about each of the different options. So as mentioned, these will be the three main barcode options we're discussing today, and DataWorks 3 of 9 is a barcoding font that's used with SQL Server Reporting Services, or SSRS. SSRS reports were not available until Epicor version 9, or they had limited availability in earlier versions because they really were at least available in 8, but limitedly. And ID automation is software package that includes several different fonts, which can also be used with SSRS reports. ID automation also can use graphics to render an image accurately without any visible distortion or information loss, and has the capability of doing other types of barcodes as well as 2D barcodes. BarTender software package includes several different fonts also. A label designer application is the main, quote, report for your labels, and different versions of BarTender software have been available since Vantage 8 at least, maybe even earlier. So first we'll talk about DataWorks 3 of 9. Here we have a quick hit list of what the pros, cons, and costs are. So the pros are that DataWorks 3 of 9 is integrated with Epicor in their SSRS reports, including the standard out-of-the-box reports. Its ease of use, since it's out of the box. Its cost is a pro, and the ability to use with software that's not Epicor is also a pro. The cons, it's just one font, and you need to make sure you format the size and font correct so that you can scan it and don't lose any data. And there is limited usage for this particular font. Some of your customers will want other fonts, for example. And then the cost is free. So DataWorks 3 of 9 is a font that's used in many of the standard Epicor SSRS reports. Using standard reports as a guide, you can create your own barcodes using this font. The cost is virtually free. You just need to make sure your server has the font installed and then use the font in a report. Since this is only one font, you have some limitations on data that can be used in the one barcode. As mentioned, you also need to make sure the size of the field and font size of the field are sufficient to be able to scan the barcodes. Always test scanning the longest, most complicated value that could be in that barcoded field. It can be difficult to read depending on the font size. Suggests 24 points or more, and it's not a guaranteed read, which means there is no checksum or other verification. Other barcodes and 2D codes have checksums built into guarantee reading. Here, for example, I show a short job number, but instead you should test scanning a 14-character job number with dashes and any other special characters you may use. And you'll see in SSRS, the DataWorks bar 39 is usually a 24-point size in the standard reports, also for Epicor. So the pros, cons, and costs about ID automation software. So the pros are that there's several barcodes fonts. Here I list a bunch of them, and I think there's even more than what I list here. Code 3 of 9, 128, A, B, and C. QR code, PDF 417. Those are a lot of them that, a lot of companies use. Installation and usage is less complicated than using BarTender software, so that's a pro. And ability to use the software that is not Epicor, that's a pro again with ID automation. Cons is that there's additional software and additional setup for using with SSRS reports. And the cost is it's more than free, so it's more than DataWorks 309, and it's less than BarTender. And CodaBears is a reseller for the software. Oops. ID automation can be used with any SSRS report and with other software also. Installing the package and integrating the barcodes into SSRS is less complicated than using the BarTender software package, but takes more effort than DataWorks 3 of 9. Check with the CodaBears sales team to get an estimate of cost for the software and installation.
So Karen, before you go on, do have a couple folks put in where they're using barcodes currently. So Ed says they use barcode to open a specific folder for their drawings or programs or CAD files are shared for the manufacturing purposes. That way they don't have to keep typing that full path in. Tracy, we use it on our product for UPC identification for both themselves and for the distributors. Carol says they use BarTender for product serial labels, even printed on special paper to etch serial numbers on products. And lastly, from Justin, we use QR codes on job travelers for production employees to use handheld scanners to start and end labor activities.
Cool. Yeah.
Just some extra examples for you.
Yep. Thanks group for the examples. Now we'll continue on to the overview kind of the pros, cons, and costs for BarTender software. So some of the pros are there's a free trial available, usually 30 days worth you can have for the software. It includes many applications in one software package. It offers the most flexibility for automation and labels and ability to use with software that is not Epicor. That's a pro for all three of these barcoding options. The cons is, of course, there's additional software and setup and additional setup for using with the labels in Epicor. And the cost might be a con if you have a lower budget. This is the more expensive option for barcoding, and that's mentioned in the cost. And then Epicor is a reseller for this software BarTender. And no, we aren't talking about people taking drinks, but just had to put the little picture in there for BarTender. So Siegel Scientific offers a free trial of the BarTender software package. You can find it on their website, and that includes 12 or more applications in BarTender 2022. The labels can be automated to print from Epicor or can be set up to use manual import. Installation of the software package is more involved than the two previous options for barcoding. And the setup to integrate and automate with Epicor data is more complicated. Check with your Epicor customer account manager or CAM to get an estimate of the cost for the software and installation. So now we'll talk in more detail about each of these three. So DataWorks 3 of 9, we mentioned it's used in SSRS reports. It's easy to copy and change for fields as needed. Here we show an example again of the job number, and then that's the barcode with DataWorks 3 of 9. And this is what the actual data for that job number is, because here we can see Epicor uses a calculated BC job number value. So this is what Epicor is actually sending to the report and will be in the DataWorks 3 of 9 barcode scanner. You should always test scanning longest, most complicated value that will be in that field. And here we can see the expression behind it. and can be modified so that you have, the fields for the assembly.value or whatever you want for a new barcode on your SSRS reports. So the example here is a custom job traveler report, which shows the job number barcoded and the job number field using the Arial font. Notice the asterisk before and after. For scanning DW39, you need to have the, the starting and ending asterisk in your SSRS expressions. I think some barcode readers / scanners, you might be able to program a starting and ending asterisk, but if most of them, you'll do it on the barcode itself to be able to read it. And then it's easy to copy and paste the barcode and change the expression behind the field to point to another field. So the ID automation software package, here we just show a few different barcodes, the QR code, I think PDF 417 and maybe the 128 or vice versa. Which one was which? Oh, here, this one tells, yes, the run quantity one is PDF 417. So ID automation supports barcodes that are code 128, A, B, and C, GS 1-128, MSI, USPS, and PostNet. And then it also includes some 2D codes, Aztec dot code, PDF 417 QR code, and data matrix. ID automation software needs to be installed, and CodaBears sells the software and can do the installation and setup. Different fonts can be used. Here I'm showing an example of the 3 fonts in the columns right after their data. So the QR code here is actually showing the job assembly and sequence separated by the bars, and the run quantity has this expression behind it, and as you can see, I format the values so that it only has 2 decimal places. Otherwise it would actually scan as the raw data, which might be for 5 decimal places. And then quantity per barcode, quantity per is the barcode, and here that one I have as oops, sorry, my mouse is too scroll happy depending on where I am. I'm sorry, I forgot which barcode the last one is, and I don't have it listed, but we can look at it later. Automation software needs to be installed, and CodaBears sells the software. Different fonts can be used. The 3 fonts are shown here. Barcodes are set up using a background image that includes an expression for the connection to the ID automation software. So you're actually connecting to where your ID automation software is located on a server, and then putting in additional information to tell which kind of barcode and what field you want represented in the barcode. And we already talked about how the format is used for this numeric quantity so that you can only, so it would only scan for 2 decimal places instead of the default of 5. So here's the overview of BarTender software package. The 3 listed on the left here are the main 3 that we'll be talking about today, but BarTender software package includes all of these different software programs within the package. The BarTender Designer, Integration Builder, and Administration Console are likely to be the most often used applications, and those are what we'll discuss today. BarTender Designer is used to design labels based on generic labels provided by Epicor, or custom labels designed by you, and general input labels designed by you. Integration Builder is the program that's used to set up the automation for label files and processing them. Admin Console, the Administration Console, is used to set up your printers to use and to deploy your integration files once they are tested. There are many more features that will not be covered today, but you can explore them after you have installed the software or the trial version. So on this slide, we show a little bit about the BarTender Designer. You can connect to different database types. We show a few of them, but you can see there's a scroll bar that there's plenty more. And we show input example label file and label file that was used as a connection to an Epicor output file. So in BarTender, I mentioned you can link to data in a text, XML, Excel, MS Access, and many other file types. You can also create a label with input prompts to fill in the fields in the label. So that's what this middle one is. And you can add all different types of fields, fonts, barcodes, etc. You can specify to use serial numbers and relay how many copies of each label you would like to print. After you design your label, you can print or print preview from the designer software. So that was the first one of three. That's the main areas in BarTender software package. And then, we have a second slide also on BarTender Designer. Continue. And here we show an example of setting up label copies to use the value from your database. So you can see that you can choose the value from your database there and what field. And then also the second picture shows part of the setup for serial numbers. So you can say that you're going to use the serial number and increment it by 1. There's all different options here that you can use in combination and start, testing out your serial numbers and number of copies that you need to use. So you can experiment with whichever setup you want to do. It can be done in several different ways, and you should see what works best for your particular needs. So the next of the three parts of BarTender software that we'll look at is the integration builder. And as mentioned, it's used to automate the printing of your labels. So here you can see that you can use a file detection to look in a particular folder. There's also other options that you can do besides the folder. I think there's FTP site, etc. And you set up a file pattern that you're looking for. And then you can also rename when it's done or when it fails. It shows down below there. And then that's one of the main areas you fill in an integration, and the other is to fill out whatever actions you want. And the main action that we'll be looking at is the print command script. And here we can see that's what we added as an action and what we filled in for our source and variables there. So as mentioned, you can specify a folder to watch for specific file pattern names, allow the software to rename the processed and failed files after attempting to process them, and you can add other actions and set up additional variables to meet your needs. So the second slide for integration builder here, we can see within integration builder, there's an option to test your labels. And you just click the start button when you're ready to test it, and it will, do a simulated print or an actual print, depending on what you choose. And you will get messages similar to what's shown here. And those messages can be used for troubleshooting if you do get an error Otherwise, it's going to show that you were successful. And when you have your integration files set up as you think you need, you're going to use this test to test the print process or preview in an integration builder before deploying for general use in the administration console. You can review any error messages and correct things as needed before deployment. So the administration console. This administration console holds the security information, the printer list, and priorities for printers, and the deployed integration builder files, which will then automate the printing. So Epicor pretty much, BarTender pretty much loads in whatever printers you have available on whichever machine you have it installed, and you can, set which ones you want to use and which ones are the default, etc. And here is the section in the admin console that shows what's deployed currently, and you can go ahead and start and stop any deployments once they're in the admin console as you would like. So on the second screen, you can see here there's a lot more options than what we just showed for the admin console. You have all these different options, including right now here is the user's permissions, so you can set up to deny certain users from some of the functions, etc. And you can view all your licensing information, etc. We're just showing you these as a preview. And you can see the different areas of allowable permissions for the different users. They can use, different permissions for the admin console and different permissions for the BarTender program. And there's probably additional information too, which we can look at when we go into the admin console.
Hey, Karen, have a question about BarTender from someone, or kind of more of a statement. Josh had said that they were having issues using BarTender when they went to go print from the Epicor mobile warehouse. He said that the service was constantly crashing and the service account user had to be constantly relogged on to the local server. He was just wondering if anybody else has had such an experience or might have a workaround for it. I don't know if you've run into that or not in your experiences.
I have not. I have not worked with BarTender and the mobile web service. And
okay.
My understanding is that you could, have BarTender installed on a certain server, and that it should always be running no matter where that print is coming from. And I know there is something about if you're using a network path that you might have to put in specific user for your to run your integrations rather than using a network service or a local service. So maybe that's one area that he wants to try and see if he can use. We can look at that when I demo it.
I was going to unmute Josh just so he could kind of explain his problem. And I also have a answer from John that says he ran into that as well, Josh, and that it was a printer driver issue. But if you want to unmute yourself, Josh, just to kind of further explain since you offered that.
Yeah, so we had BarTender set up on a local server here, and we have Epicor mobile warehouse. And the pass-through for that was to have a service account user logged into a client on the server that had BarTender installed that was running the integration file. And then in the Epicor mobile warehouse application, you would go to the settings, issues, returns, and there was a field in there where you would supply said user. That way it could link to the client, find its printers, and then print. So the issue we kept running into with that is either for whatever reason, since we're cloud, the user would time itself out, the integration file would stop running, the service in the background would stop running. So it was constantly having to relog that user, restart the service, all those type of things on like a weekly basis, sometimes every couple days basis. We recently Epicor just released this this edge agent that they use for edge printing. And we have just now set that up as of a couple days ago. And going forward, we no longer need BarTender. We no longer need to keep that service account user logged in. We don't have to have an integration file to keep up with. It seems to be working seamlessly from the handheld now using the Edge agent software that kind of links your local printers to the handheld printing, to the cloud.
Yeah. So I'm glad you shared that, because things could be a lot different for the cloud. So
okay, yeah, and that's why I was saying I missed a little bit of the start of that conversation, so I didn't want to derail us too much. But I would just, the user group I thought might just share something we found that was a little more beneficial as far as printing from mobile warehouse itself. And if you're talking about the client, then yeah, that would just be for others that are out there struggling with how to get my report styles to print from the mobile warehouse application to local printers.
John pointed out too, he thinks that BarTender has their own Zebra print driver, and that resolved his issue. Now, but he's also on-prem using REST API triggered by the BPM to send the label to BarTender. So it could be a different combination of things that John ran into than you, but maybe between the two, if anybody else runs into that problem, that'll help anybody that has that.
Right. It's just been to get rid of the extra, things to manage and extra subscriptions and things of that sort. It's cut down on that. That's all I was getting at.
Right.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Anybody who does run into some printing problems too, I know that was one thing that Joe mentioned too at the beginning when we were working together, and I suggested, using the print drivers for Siegel print drivers. So whenever possible, you probably want to use those to work with the BarTender software.
Understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you too for sharing your information and hearing about a new product that's out there for some of the cloud users and probably for the premise users too. But so anyway, now in summary about the 3 different products, we are suggesting you choose the barcode that works for you. Maybe your customer needs to use DataWorks 3 of 9. Maybe that's all that they're wanting you to use, or that their scanners can read, or whatever. Maybe you need to include lots of information or non-ASCII information within a barcode, and then using a 2D barcode tends to work much better since more information can be included in a smaller space. So then you might want to use ID automation or BarTender software. Remember that 3 of 9 is not the solution to use if you want a verification barcode. Instead, you should look for a code that has a checksum. Keep in mind also how far away you will be when scanning, as that can affect the barcode reading as well. If you want to barcode something on the 3rd tier warehouse shelving, a QR code may be better choice since it has a direct relationship between the distance and size of the barcode that will be printed. So in addition, additional summary information is that DataWorks 3 of 9 reading distance depends on how big the font size is. For relatively close barcode reading, use a 24-point font and a 1/2-inch size text box for this font. Be 1/2 inch tall. Be aware that not all scanners can read all codes. Some scanners will need to be programmed to read different codes. Usually a PDF document that comes with your scanner will include different scans that you can use to activate certain barcodes. As an overall summary, DataWorks 3 of 9 is the easiest to use, lowest cost, best if you do not have a big volume of barcodes needed outside of the SSRS reports using one font. ID Automation is the middle range software product as far as cost, ease of use, and variety of usage scenarios. And BarTender is the highest costing product, more complicated to set up and use, but offers the most diversity of options for labels, reports, etc. So next we'll move on to the demonstration and then come back to the PowerPoint presentation. Here you can see this way to success. We're going to use barcodes, which create labels, and then you're scanning those labels. Will help you have better success in your data entry and timely data information. Okay, now I'm going to bring up a couple of different SSRS reports that have some of these examples on them. So you just have to bring it from one screen to the other. Oops. So here is that example job traveler that was customized and shows the job number with DataWorks 3 of 9, and then the job number also with Arial font. And we can see on different pages that we have that. And if we go into the design view of the job traveler, we can see the expression for the DataWorks 3 of 9 one is that equals fields calculated BC job number value. And we can see the font up here is DataWorks 3 of 9 and the size is 24 points. So I just copied that actual text box and just changed the font to be Arial to get that information so you can see what's behind, like I mentioned, what's behind the barcode. Sorry, it's going to take a little bit here. So if you want, I can demo doing, another field, for example. In the data set for job head, I guess we could put production quantity up there if we wanted to. So the easiest way to do it, as I mentioned, is to copy and paste. Oops, if you can get the right part selected. Copy. All right, copy. Why isn't my paste showing up? I gotta probably click somewhere else. There we go, paste. And then we can move it over. And then change the expression to be the production quantity, for example. I have a saved GUID, so it's trying to run it with that, but when you make a change, sometimes it needs to refresh. So you can see that barcode is a lot different size than the original one. So you can see it must be holding different data. And we can do the same thing if we want to.
Depending on your scanner, you may need to put in front and behind those asterisks, because that indicates to the scanner where to start and stop. It just kind of depends on what your scanner setup is.
Right, and because this field is not a calculated one, it probably does not have those asterisks in it. So if we run it and view it in Arial, we can find out what exactly the field has in it. Arial or any other font you can use that displays it.
And while you're doing that, Aaron pointed out with 3 of 9, you want to make sure that you test it because not all character sets are supported by 3 of 9. I think it supports the basic ASCII. So if you're doing any sort of symbols or, for example, special characters, the O with the umlauts, things like that, it may not support that. So be careful about what you're coding with 3 of 9, or be careful, like if it's part number, maybe you set up a rule that special characters aren't allowed in there and can only be the basic ASCII set.
So if you wanted to add the asterisks in front and behind, you just do a addition to your calculation to add in the asterisks.
You may need to change the dot value to .value.toString because it'll be a decimal to start with, I believe.
Yeah, on this particular one, it would be a,
Yeah.
actually in here it's CSTR. That. And then I'll change it in one that we view as Arial so we can see the difference. Okay, oh, it must be cut off here. It doesn't show the whole thing. Let's move it over. Whoop. Okay, I'm having placement problems today still. And it's probably still not wide enough because I made it smaller. This is the most frustrating part to me in SSRS report is getting the handles on your field. There we go. Now you can see it has the beginning asterisk and the ending asterisk. And if you were to actually scan this barcode, you would see that it has the correct value when you try to scan it. So that is the example of a the DataWorks 3 of 9 barcode. Does anybody have any questions on that, or should we move on to the ID automation?
Go ahead and move on, and if the questions pop up, I'll read them out to you.
Okay. So I also have an ID automation example. I just need to pull over again. So this is like we showed in the slide, only I just showed one row in the slide where we have the QR code showing these values and the run quantity. Barcode is next to it and the quantity per barcode is also next to that. And if we look at how it's designed in the designer code here, here's the actual regular font that was used that showed the job number assembly sequence with bars in between. And then you have a text box that's empty in your table here for the actual barcode. But in the properties here, you'll put in a source that's external and a background repeat will be clip. And then you put in the expression that's shown here, which is an expression with your server and barcode, pointing to the ID automation, which type of QR code, and then the actual fields you're gonna put in there. And you'll notice here in the job number, it's just the job number with the bar, but then I converted the assembly sequence to a string with the bar and the operation sequence to a string also. And then the example that we did for the run quantity barcode also includes, as I mentioned, the format part. So right before the field, since it's a quantity, and if you didn't want to show all 5 decimals, you can format it and tell it what kind of format you want to use for that run quantity value. And again, here it's pointing to your server and the ID automation software and what type of barcode it's using. And the quantity per barcode is using the code 128 quantity per value. And I think the T at the end is what says that it should show the quantity under the barcode. So when we previewed it, you can see there's a little 1 under these. The quantity per, I think there's a couple with a different quantity per, but there, 0.5. So, you know, once you get one of these in as your expression, it's usually just a matter of copying that expression to another field and then just making the changes that you want to. So if you're going to do another QR code, you could copy the whole expression up to where it says the plus, and then just add your fields in the next text box that you're going to try and have an expression for. And if you're going to use a different type of code, you can look at the expression for those, because they all have different parameters that, you know, I don't really know by heart. I just look at the examples that we have to use as a template for using them. So, you know, it's basically this part's all the same, and then dash whatever code and the dot ASPX question mark D equals quotes, and then you can put in whatever field you want and format the field if you want to. But also, as mentioned on this field, there was some characters at the end for the particular font, code 128. So Fred might be more familiar with what these mean, but I know we
So
have
depending on the code you're using, it may have other parameters that you can put there that control how it's formatted. That's all it's doing.
Yeah. So I did look at the function for the T, and that was to show the number. And I think I don't know if it's omitted or if it's a different value that would be to not show the number there. But, you know, if you get ID automation, you'll have some documentation on what those parameters are too. So, okay, any further questions on ID automation, or should we move on to BarTender?
Keep on going, and if there's questions, I'll read them out to you.
Okay. So now I'll bring over the bartenders one at a time to the screen. So here we can see the BarTender Designer, and right now I have a few different labels open. And actually I put them right before this presentation. I put on just a kind of a label to tell you which type of label that we're looking at. In this case, this is an input label, which means you'll enter data for input. And this is the receipt label, which is the generic one from Epicor that you can output using a report style for BarTender. And then we have a couple just simple part labels that just have hardly any data, but it's an example. And that's this one's called a large just because the sheet of paper is large, I guess. And then this one's small, and it's also a part field. But we mentioned before that you can set up the database connections to see what your label will connect to. And so we already had a file in there, and you can see it shows you the file preview here. So it's basically the same file output that Epicor's generic ones output, as far as you have, label column headers and column fields listed below it. But the generic output files from Epicor also have 2 lines above your data that show what's needed to be sent to the integration file for printing. So it gives your printer information, your label that it's using information. But in order to connect to the database setup, you just need to have a file that doesn't have that data information in the top 2 rows. I actually probably have an example I can show here. So let's see, this was part labeled small. So these 2 lines, even though it looks like it's more than 2 lines, it's just because it's in Notepad. If you made it wider, you can get to 2 lines basically. But those are like the control lines for printing. So all you do is you get an output file from Epicor, you take out those 2 lines and then save this as a text file or an Excel file or other different options in order to design your label. That's what you need to do. And if you continue on, you can also view it in here and say what your delimiter is. And on this tab, you can actually see the fields with the column headers. So in BarTender Designer, then you can also print preview. And I don't remember if I set it up to have more than 1 copy. Yeah, looks like I put the number of labels on probably how many copies you get. Even though it's just sent 1 record, it has 5 labels. And we do that by going to the print area, and it says copies per serial number is using the database field of number labels. So click on here, you can tell it if it's going to use a database field or specify the quantity when printing or get it from a data source, etc. And so in your database fields, and this one I had only 3 fields, and number of labels is the field that tells us how many copies we want to print.
We're getting close to time here, Karen.
Oh, sure. Okay, so you can play around with, designing your labels and stuff in here. I guess I'll show the integration builder next then. I usually am way ahead of time, but I didn't time this. So, and doing the demo part is different too. So in the integration file here, we have one for Epicor's generic receipt part. And you put in a path for the folder to scan, or you can use other options relative to integration, temporary storage, a librarian, or add a location. And then it reads your contents and you tell it what file pattern you want and when you want it, when the file is created or when it's changed. And then you have what it should do after detection, if it should rename the file, what it should rename it, and after a failure, what it should do. And I think integration, yeah, here's integration where if you do have problems with using a local system, you can say specify user credentials. And then there's the print commands script, which, you know, the basic ones you're going to want to use are what I show here. I have this checkbox for prompt for data input. Most of the time you won't have that check, but that's what you want to check if you're going to do like a print to PDF. And since I don't have a label printer, that was my option. And you can also look at the action. And again, this is what defaults in, so you shouldn't have to make any changes unless you needed to use specific credentials. And then, as we mentioned in integration, you can go ahead and test. So you would have to have a file out there ready when you, well, you don't have to have it ready when you start it. You can press start. And if there is no file out there, it's just waiting for the event. And let me get my file folder. Oh, there we go. Oops, I have to rename a file. There. As soon as I renamed it with the extension BT, then it found it. It says it's detected, and then what it's doing there. And as I mentioned, mine was prompting. So I'm putting on my desktop called test 1. And there we can see it printed. And again, I must have a couple copies. And we can stop that. And that's a quick demo of the integration builder. And now we'll look at the admin console quick, because since we are out of time. And as we mentioned, there's all the different printers. And then when you go to integrations, here you can have the deployed integrations, which you deploy them in Integration Builder to send them here, and then they would run forever if you wanted them to, if you don't have any issues like he mentioned. But I have them stopped right now, but you could start whichever ones you wanted to, and then it would automatically print without doing the test and Integration Builder. I think I just needed to go back to my slideshow for a couple things, and then we can continue. Yeah. So now we know how to get the barcodes that can be used with Epicor. What's next? Well, you can create labels for your vendors or customers. You can add barcodes to reports and scan them into fields inside Epicor. Keep in mind, if you are scanning a barcode with several fields and one barcode, like our example QR code, you will likely need a customization to your Epicor form to separate out the fields into the screen form for starting a production job, for instance. You can create labels for your warehouse shelves and bins to help your cycle counts and inventory accuracy and speed. Create ID badges for employees to log into MES, and many more uses with Epicor. Time for questions and answers. If anybody has any
we're gonna cut the questions short because we're already running over. So Marta, David, James, and Amin, I'll move your questions into Stump the Chump so we can get to them in there. And let's go ahead and switch over to Bill.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to make sure you try things in the test environment to thoroughly test before you move it to live. Okay.
Thanks, Karen.